Welcome to the CEO's Heart for Service, where leaders of exceptional B2B businesses work together to answer this question: how do you scale your services without compromising your client experience or the core values that drive them? I'm your host, Matt Wolf. Join us as B2B leaders share hard-won insights and field-tested strategies for the tightrope walk between integrity and growth. We'll find our balance and the way forward together. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the CEO's Heart for Service. I'm your host, Matt Wolf. I'm flying solo today. I'm without my trusty co-host, but I am no worse for the wear because you are about to meet Cassandra Shea. She is the founder and CEO of Gold Standard Consulting Group. She is a consultant with a very unique power, talking about she interacts with individuals and teams around the idea of capacity. She helps unlock hidden and unused capacity in individuals and teams, and she can put numbers to it. She can show you the real impact of the work that she's doing, which is one thing that makes her so unique. She is merging soft skills with real numbers in a powerful way. But I think, man, when you think about scaling, when you think about being able to grow an organization and having the capacity to do so, she is tackling this from an angle I've never heard anyone talk about before, at least not this articulate, not this deep, and this powerful of a way. She's coming at it from the place of identity, and the thing holding us back is so often the stories that we tell about ourselves. And she's going to invite you into a journey that's going to unlock more than you probably expected. And then there's some sub-themes that we get to explore today. The idea of how so many of us in the consulting space and in the services space, we give other people solutions that we don't use on ourselves. We don't actually take our own medicine, and how powerful is it if and when we do? And another thing, I'll just put this bug in your ear before you go and listen to her. What happens if we rehire our past self? We tend to go through different phases in our careers, and maybe we discount or forget about or leave behind past skill sets and things that make us really valuable and are a huge part of who we are. And what happens when we recapture that to tackle the present? There's just so much packed into this. You're just going to find a thoughtful, supportive conversation here that's going to unlock new possibilities for you as we go over and talk to Cassandra Shea. Cassandra, welcome to the show. I'm so happy that you're here today.
Thank you, Matt. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. We had a great talk the other day, and it just really got me excited to dive deeper and just to understand everything that you're doing at Gold Standard Consulting Group. Let me kick off, though, we have just a sort of fun, silly little thing we like to ask, although it does reveal some interesting stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, the premise here is we're talking about B2B services, very high, and you and I both work in very high stakes situations. These are high stakes, high trust things that people allow us to step into their world with. And the only way that ever happens is if somebody meets the human, people love that we have great information. They love that we have great qualifications and all these things. But the big question is, can I trust this human? So we try to address the human side of things and get to know people on the podcast as well. And the first way we usually do that is just this. Like, you probably, when you were a kid growing up, didn't have Gold Standard Consulting Group written in crayon anywhere. Like, you probably didn't see yourself going this direction in life. So where did you think you were going to go when you were younger?
I'll give you two time snapshots. When I was 5 years old, I wanted to be an artist and an archaeologist. Why? Wow. I don't know. But I thought it would be so interesting to paint the picture of the past. And I just had this fantasy of going on archaeological digs. Fun fact, I've actually never seen the Indiana Jones movies. So I don't actually know where this idea of being an archaeologist came to being. And the second thing that I'll answer that I think is so funny, and I've thought about this a lot over the last year. When I was 18 years old, I was in my sophomore year of college, so second year, undeclared. I had switched my major 13 times by the time I was 18 in my second year because I wanted to learn everything. And I remember one of my professors, I was in the non-science track for biology, just to check my liberal arts requirement for that. And I remember him asking, like, what do you want to do? Like, you're obviously curious, you love learning. What do you want to do? And I remember I'm 18, I know nothing, okay? And I go, I want to be a consultant. And he laughs, like, not in a funny, like, ah, like, that's so nice. He just laughs and he's like, that's ridiculous. And I said, why? And he said, you have to have tons of experience. You need to create this whole life story. You can't be a consultant until you're probably in your 50s. And I just remember thinking, I think a consultant would be great because I can learn, I can go deep, and there's always going to be something for me to expand my skills, expand my network, expand my challenge zone. And I've just been thinking about that now. That's more than half a lifetime ago. And I've been thinking about that professor kind of laughing me out of the room. And now I've built a consultancy and I'm not yet in my 50s. It did not take me that long to do it.
Yeah, you showed them. That's that's amazing that you just pulled that out of name. I mean, because truly, that this is often a more discovered thing, profession, or thing, a pivoted into thing to be a consultant. But that you had that wherewithal, that's really amazing.
And where that came from, I can't tell you. I didn't know any consultants. Like I don't again, it's like the archaeologists. Like where did that inspiration come from? I don't know.
Those are both fascinating things. You've already addressed my follow-up question about Indiana Jones, so we can move past that. I literally just had this a conversation similar to this before we started this recording. In that, when you talk about getting to learn from other people and all these perspectives, I've been thinking about this podcast a lot in that vein. Anytime I get to do discovery work as a brand and marketing consultant, it's a really privileged position to be in on so many levels that I know from our first conversation, I think you really appreciate, because you do get to learn from other people, which is very cool. You get to absorb other perspectives, but you also get to hold people's stories, which is
Mm.
not a small thing at all. Everyone's story is, I think, a sacred thing. And there's a particular sacredness to when you're working with a business owner who has spent so many years and so much heart and energy trying to build something really special. There's just and what they've sacrificed and what they've given along the way. There's just so much packed in there. I don't know if that resonates, but that was something on my mind about what you and I do from different directions.
I agree. The preciousness of holding the story is such a sacred honor, and to be a trusted advisor. I think you and I both have a Venn diagram where we typically meet leaders at a point of change. There's something changing in their life, their business, their vision, and it's really sacred to meet somebody in potentially the middle of a chaos or transition, and hopefully be a ballast of clarity and be a force of peace in an uncertain future.
Yeah, yeah. And it's because you see things this way is why you're such a great person to be here today. Podcast. Well, let's talk about what you do for people, because you're filling. It's fascinating. I'm fascinated by what you do. I think you're filling this really unique and valuable need for people as a coach. So I'd love if you could just share a little bit about the work you're doing at Gold Standard Consulting Group.
Yeah, if we had a whiteboard, I would draw you a Venn diagram, and one circle would be identity, and one circle would be capacity. And I believe that we unlock leaders' potential if we want to change the outcome, if we want to change a result. The middle of that diagram, where those two factors intersect, is where change happens. And the two levers that I believe affect change on the greatest level, have the biggest impact, if you will, are identity, which I would define as very simply the story we tell ourselves about who we are. And that ends up dictating our decisions, that ends up dictating what's possible. It creates potentially false flags and assumptions that we get to remove as we consider possibility. And then we also need to look at our capacity. You and I both run businesses and have busy lives, and we have life outside of business and family and these different identities we play. And so our capacity I believe is not infinite, but we have agency to choose how we direct it. And if people have the capability to change, that's where I get really excited to help them unlock, both at the individual level as well as the team level. And what's been interesting is I've spent the last, 6.5 years since I started this business largely in one-to-one coaching settings. And in the last year, I've expanded that to coaching teams. And I've logged about 3,500 hours plus at this point of this work. And what was happening before is I would use words like identity, and people would go, okay, that sounds kind of squishy, or maybe that's a nice to have. And what's interesting is the collective conversation has really shifted to realize that identity is, I believe, it precedes our strategy. If we're going to go to the whiteboard and figure out the next business move or the next evolution of what momentum and change look like in an organization, I believe we start at the identity level, both for the individual as well as the org. And the last thing I'll say is not everyone wants to change. And so what I've been able to do, and kind of where I've focused and honed in on the capacity side of the circle in the last 13 months, is developing a capacity calculator. So I can actually show a CEO where the capacity is hidden on their team, where their leaders, the smartest, highest paid, best people on the team who are meant to be solving the hardest problems and scaling the company, might be misdirecting their efforts. And what that's done, Matt, has been really fun. I know that you're in the marketing world, and so we talk a lot about, return on investment for marketing. And for consulting and coaching, it's sometimes hard to quantify change. And so what I've been able to do, or at least the focus area for me over the last 13 months, focusing on how does capacity affect identity and vice versa, is actually starting to assign a number to it. So I did a study last week, and one of the senior leaders in a company, he's a VP, is at a 10% utilization ratio. He's working in 10% of his capacity. And this is all self-reported data, which makes it even more interesting. And the cost to the company, based on his self-reported data, is $164,000 a year of misallocated labor spend. And that's one leader. And I already found $300,000 from two other leaders. So now we're sitting at, 464 just between three leaders, where they're focused on things that are not directed to scaling activities. And they're self-assessing that they're out of the pocket of the things that they know they can do, their gifts they can bring, their talents they can offer to the company, 90% of the time in this one case, which then gives us a roadmap to not just say, hey, here's what needs to change, but here's the cost of not changing. And here's the opportunity of what change could look like and the fruit that it could bear.
That's so powerful. That was something that really struck me about what you do. There aren't many models that do actually mix the numbers with the squishy stuff, right? You sort of
know. It's hard to get one without the other.
Yeah, right. There's so much of coaching and consulting a lot of times is sort of trusting that people will trust that the squishy stuff matters, and that it's going to result in something later on. But so the metric or the thing that we're looking at is, are they engaged in, you said, scaling activities, right?
So I would define scaling activities as anything that's going to derive outsized growth efforts. So I've studied a lot of Dr. Ben Hardy's work, 10x is easier than 2x, the science of scaling. I got to actually train with him online and in person in 2023. And there's so much meat on the bone in those two books around identity and why our identity creates a filter with which we decide how we're going to be and act in the world. And my obsession kind of started when I realized, the premise makes sense. The hypothesis makes sense. The story you tell yourself about what's possible is going to dictate how you show up in the world and the choices you make to grow the business. But scale is different. Scale is nonlinear growth accelerated. And what I got really obsessed around is this idea of how do you operationalize it? Ben created this roadmap of the why and the what, but I started getting obsessed with this question of how do you do it? How do you actually take a leader on that journey? How do you change their identity? How do you change a team's identity? And so that's kind of been the genesis of how I got to this point.
Do you do that? What does that look like?
Well, there's a few different layers to it, as one would expect. And I would have to say there's a couple things that I would preface the answer with that might surprise people. One, I think you actually start by grieving that things need to change. And change is really, really hard. And so when I meet leaders in a point of transition, we usually have a conversation around this work is going to get harder before it gets easier. And there will be some grief because who you are can't get you where you're going next. Such a platitude in business. I think it's really true. It's one of those things we say, but I see it in person. But we don't often stop to grieve. We don't often stop to grieve that the person we were in our last iteration, and even maybe the things we loved about that person and how we showed up in business, they can't always go forward with us. And so there's a lot of, I think, misconceptions about the inner journey to changing your identity. One of the biggest ones, I think, is that it's easy and it's going to be relatively frictionless, like almost like creating a marketing persona. And that's part of it. But I think the first step, the deeper work, is to grieve that what once was is falling away. And if you want something different, if you want to create a different outcome, you can't stay the same or stay stagnant. Like, we know that about change, but we also need to create some space to grieve. And I have not seen a single person on the internet saying that. And I hate to be the person that bears that news, but if we can grieve, if we can hold space for our own evolution. I know you shared in our conversation, you had an identity shift in your own career. And I'm sure there was massive grief in closing a chapter. And sometimes it's more subtle for folks. It's a longer change horizon, and sometimes it's all at once. I worked with people who, recently were laid off, or there's this huge change event in their life. And we sit there, we actually stop and give some pause and we grieve.
Yeah, that is powerful. Well, yeah, I mean, if you switch 90% of what you were doing, that means you're working with different people. Your relationships change. The way that you feel affirmed, or that you even know the scorecard that you're doing the right things has changed, let alone so much about you shift that work, the identity changes, and that's a big thing to grieve.
Yeah.
It's like you said, I went from the world of theater into marketing. I had 25 years under my belt in a whole different industry and community and way that people talk and converse and values and activity. And in my case, I don't know that I even recognized that I had maybe closed the door yet. Sometimes you leave that door, cracked open a little bit. And then when you realize it's really probably closed, it's hard. Gosh, no, you're right. I've heard a lot about change management and that being an act of managing grief through the change. I've never heard it applied in this kind of setting. It's incredible. And deeply empathetic, which I really appreciate. So that was one layer, right? The grief.
Yeah, it's the uncomfortable conversation I would have at the beginning. Very simple. And I think for anyone listening, these are some questions that I would ask somebody if we were having a deep identity level conversation. And I can run you through a few of those. And if any of those spark your imagination, Matt, I'd love to hear. But the very first question I start with identity work is, what do you want? And I'll caveat, the question seems deceptively simple. I've had clients work with me on that one question amongst a myriad of things for about 6 months.
Wow.
Because there's so many conditions we impose upon what we think we want, based on our conditioning, based on the other roles we play in our lives, mother, daughter, sister, friend, wife, like whatever those other roles are, also create a perception that we're allowed to want a certain thing. One of the tools I use is called a money thermostat. And it's in the sequence of defining what we want. And we go in and I ask somebody to deploy $1 billion. Like $1 billion is dropped into your account today. What would you do with it exactly? And the one condition is you have to deploy all of the dollars. And every single client who's gone through this exercise, and there's layers to it, there's additional questions. Every single client comes away clear on what they actually want. And the second and most interesting thing is they recognize that they need less money than they thought they needed to make their wildest dreams come true. Their most generous most legacy driven version of themselves, it's going to cost less than they thought. But the number might feel out of reach for right now. Like maybe that number, for example, is 10 million. For one client, it was 10 million. Could fund every life dream he's ever conceptualized of. Another client was super interesting. He wanted to deploy $450 million to buy a college and completely reinvent the system of higher education. So it was really interesting and he works also in marketing and coaching. So it was fascinating, like what our hidden desires reveal about our orientation and our values. But I would say that what gets in the way of answering that question of what do I want is two things: our prior conditioning. It could even be like the zip code you were born in, the story your family of origin told you about career and money and possibility. There's so many conditions that we've created in our lives to tell us a story about what is or is not possible. And the second piece is oftentimes we justify what we want instead of being able to say, this is what I want without justification. And I believe those desires are a hidden compass, or maybe they're more aptly put like a spiritual compass to more of what we want to create in the world. And so regardless, for that client, he didn't go out and raise 450 million to go buy a college, but he did start looking at how is he transmitting information, and is there a training component to his business that he was missing, because he loves training. And so there was this energetic shift around the orientation of his work that also affected his identity. He stopped coaching or working on getting coaching clients one-to-one and started realizing that his best work was coaching entrepreneurs who had teams, so he could facilitate change on a bigger scale and have more impact. And so I believe once we surface these desires, it reveals to us parts of our identity that either A, we might have left behind or said that's too big or too scary or too weird or too different than what I'm doing now. But it also gives us some really rich fodder to create the story of who we're becoming and what we want next. So then the second piece to identity work is deserving. That's where I find the most resistance in the process, is once we get clear on what we want, do we feel like we're allowed to have it? And 9 times out of 10, I've met a few clients where they don't have a single deserving block. It's fascinating. Like, I really want to meet their parents. I'm like, explain to me how this all happened. But a lot of us have some kind of wound that I don't want to shine my light too bright. Gay Hendricks talks about this, about the upper limit problem. I don't want to be too bold. I don't want to take too much action. I don't want to shine too bright. It might eliminate the spotlight from others. There's these different ways we perceive that if we were unapologetically ourselves, perhaps someone else would suffer, or we would diminish the possibility or abundance for others, which I believe is not true. So there's a whole protocol I go through to get people more in touch with their values and drive from their inner compass versus seeking external validation. And then we operationalize it by figuring out what decisions does your new identity make, what decisions would be different as a result of your identity shift, and then we unlock capacity through delegation. And delegation, I believe, is more of a system than an act that's one and done. So I have a filter that I run people through and do deep training on delegation. Those are the 4 phases. We figure out what we desire. What do I want? Without justification. We figure out if there's a deserving block, which is where, again, 90% or more of clients get stuck. And the question I would ask there is, do you feel like you're allowed to have it? And if not, what's getting in the way? And it's not just to go and remove those roadblocks, but it's to surface the data. Third is, what decisions would be different based on this new identity? And then fourth is, who are our super who's? How do we stack a team and build a team around the energetic strengths of the leader that's right in front of me? How do we build that? And that's very practical and tactical. And I use Working Genius as one of my favorite ways to discern how are we going to create a delegation system for this leader that's going to keep them in the pocket of their capacity as much as possible. And we're shooting for 80% or more. I think it's unrealistic to get to 100. For most people, getting to 50% would actually be a huge lift to the business.
Oh, of course. Yeah. This is wonderful. No wonder you enjoy this work so much.
Can you tell?
Yeah.
It's my playground.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it absolutely shows that you love what you do. I think 1,000,000%. But it's, again, to the idea of the privileged journey, right? Like, what a wonderful journey to go on with somebody. And the thing that keeps coming to mind for me is you're just removing limitation after limitation, self-imposed limitations, that we put on in all these different ways that you're working with them. And again, addressing, so the sort of forward facing thing of what you do is this issue of capacity, which I think I would argue that gives people a reason to move forward, right? Because they can
Totally.
put a value to it. Like you said, there's numbers that they can justify it to an expense and a whatever the way we think of that. But you're getting them to this deeper thing of identity in a way that I've never heard anyone work with people. And it really is the root, right? Like you said, that we have placed these limitations in however we've told the story of who we are. God, that's incredible. And I love this. I feel like already, I think if anyone's listening to this, they're getting a sense of what it would be like to experience working with you, right? That you're going to make space for them to answer these questions and tackle these things, and how liberating it would be to go through those things. What was so compelling when we first talked is we're tackling the same thing of how do people scale? How do we unlock scalability for a company? Which I think we probably both think also as potential for impact, potential for people to change other
Absolutely.
people's lives, especially in services. So how do we unlock all of that? But both things do come to identity. So you're doing it at this personal level. We tend to sit at the identity of the business. There's two big characters in any good brand story. There's the people who they serve. Usually we call that the ideal client or whatever. And we're trying to get people to identify that person. It's funny you said the persona thing earlier. We're trying to get them to identify it out of their own experience, out of their own gut
Right.
level check of where have the actual real living breathing relationships been, that we know that's when this whole thing works best. They get the best results. We do our best work. There's the most joy in the dance of the whole thing, which is not squishy and does lead to productivity and revenue.
Yes.
So that we're trying to get them to name that person specifically, but they also have to understand who they are as a business. Who is that character, the business? And that character in this B2B, often founder led, consultative, high responsibility, high trust space is the person. It's not the business, it's the human behind the business. And a lot of these same things come up. Have where we see the limitations are often they probably haven't given themselves enough credit for what they have accomplished and how much power they really have, or how unique the solution they brought to the table truly is. I'll die on the hill that everybody I work with, and I don't care how boring they think their job is or how much they're swimming in a sea of sameness, there is something unique about who they are, and how they help the people they help. Some are aware of it and feel like they've never had a place to say it, and some have just never had it celebrated and pulled out.
Well, that lights up really quick on you working on the identity at the organizational level. What I see creates friction also for people in our seat, B2B service company owners, is that we might conflate our identity with the business's identity. And sometimes those are the same because of solopreneurs or, expert consultants running a very micro team. But one thing that I've worked a lot on for myself and my own identity journey, but also with all of my clients, is this idea of unconditional confidence, which is a term borrowed from positive psychology, that the outcome doesn't get to determine our worth as a person. Whether GSCG consulting, rises or falls, that doesn't affect how my poodle sees me. Which on the worst days possible, you just have to remember, like, the poodle isn't reading the P&L. Like, he just wants to walk and to hang out and to snuggle and, definitely is going to ask for some treats. But my dog doesn't see where my business flourishes or fails. He sees me as a person of worth whom he loves. And one thing that I would say in identity work, just a very practical, tactical check-in for everyone listening, when we do love our work so much, when we do fall in love with the process of impact that we get to provide for the world, it's so easy to make that business our identity and to see the rise and the fall of the business as a direct reflection of us. And I'm not saying to not take accountability or responsibility. That's key because we have agency. But what I found very helpful is to separate and create an identity story for ourselves. And it might change season to season as the business grows. The metaphor I use is I'm not a parent yet, but I've watched parents of toddlers and parents of teenagers. They're parenting different. Like they're not parenting the teenagers the same way they were parenting the toddler. They're a different version. Their identity is different as a parent of a teen. I just have a lot of clients right now whose kids just turned 16. It's terrifying. And they're buying new cars. They're like, well, we need to raise our income because our kids are getting more and more expensive. And that evolution, that identity journey was different than when they were the parent of a toddler. And so I believe our business is somewhat the same. What our business needs of us at each season might dictate and change how our identity might need to flex and be fluid. And so part of what I love about this work is giving people a method to keep changing their identity over time, because I might not be in that change seat with them in a deep container over the next 10 years. There's some clients I've worked with for, 2 to 3 years. But once you have the method, you can keep changing your identity. You can keep evolving your story. And that's what I find really fascinating.
Makes sense, right? That there's no world in which that capacity answer right now is a static thing, right? That it's gonna
Even 3 months, it could change. Like it can
right.
change so fast.
hmm Well, so we call this CEO's Heart for Service, right? And so one thing we often like to make sure we tackle for a second is just like what does that mean to you? Like how do you, and this is very unique what you're doing with people. So how do you know when you've delivered great service? How do you assess that for yourself?
It's a great question, and I would say it's changed over time. I used to think great service was I did a great job, they paid my invoice, and we created this transformation together. And for me, especially earlier in my career, I was very addicted and obsessed with my clients' revenue wins. And those are sweet. And I love them. And they're never to be ignored or diminished. But what I started asking my clients that was different is, what has your time away from work looked like? Because to me, the measure of identity work and evolution is not simply us producing better and better business results. One of my clients has this phrase of growth up and to the right unchecked is called cancer. And his thing for me is, please help me not hate my life as I grow. And so when I check in with him, I ask him, what does life look like outside of work? How's your health? How's your sleep? What vacation did you recently book with your daughters? He's one of the ones who has a now newly minted 16-year-old driver. And he just took off for 4 weeks in June, July, and took his daughters on a cruise with his wife. They spent some time on the Oregon coast. They live in the Pacific Northwest. They had this whole adventure over the summer. And he's getting very intentional about what time is left before his daughters go to college. And that's not dissimilar from many of my clients, where we have this really deep heart to heart of what's the why behind your scaling journey? Why do you want to change? We need leverage on the evolution. We can't just grow for growth's sake, in my opinion. That's not very interesting, and we will inevitably get burnt out. But what was so fascinating is allowing him to step back and see the quality of time that his life was able to produce because of the growth in the business, because of the systems we've set up, because of the identity evolution he's undertaken. A year ago, he didn't have the team he has in place today. We've built that team together thoughtfully. We've curated systems that allow his business to work without him being in the seat. And so he's had this business now for 3.5 years. He's never gotten to take a sabbatical for a month. And what that tells me is, if we go back to like the 4Ds, his desire was very clear when we started working together 14 months ago. He was like, I want to be able to step away from my business. I want the business to grow without me and or be able to run completely without me. And that wasn't possible when we started working together. But it took getting clear on the desire. And then it took a lot of decision and delegation work where we kept, calibrating. And so for me, delivering great service is that my client's life has improved alongside of their business scaling. And if both of those are true, I feel really lucky to be in the pocket of witnessing that change. I would never want one to come at the cost of the other, specifically that the business growth is at the cost of health or relationships or life growth. But to me, I try to take a really holistic perspective of, if we are going to scale the business, how does the business become more and more of a vehicle for good, and more of a vehicle to allow your giftedness, your talents to flourish in the world and create the impact you want, while simultaneously allowing you to become more of the person or the human that you feel called and want to be in this season.
That may be my favorite definition of success in business that I've heard in a long time. Everything about how you just said that is spectacular.
And that's coming from a marketer, so I'm going to clip that out and remember that for myself.
Yeah. Grab the transcript and pull
Yeah.
that out because, well, I think that's what we all want. Everything you said is like anyone that would be interested in this podcast that has this heart for service. Those are the things we want, but it definitely so much of the time, maybe most of the time, all of the time, for some people, does not feel attainable. And so to have hope that that kind of balance is attainable for so many founders, small business owners, consultants, coaches, wearing all the hats, that's phenomenal.
I loved that you used the word balance because so many people have ignored that. And I know it's very popular to say work life integration, balance is unattainable. But if we think about biology, like our spine keeps us in balance. And I've been learning just very simple, like spinal stretching techniques recently with the idea of if you strengthen your core, your whole biology improves. And I think that's such a metaphor for what I just said in business and what success can look like. Like, I'm not ready to divorce the word balance. I actually want to triple down on that word for myself because I think about balance like a table. It needs four legs. If you have three, it gets a little bit more, a little bit more unstable. Two, now you have a TV tray and like you can't really host a dinner party. So you're shrinking your capacity. But I believe balance is something that, at least for me, I'm a professionally trained dancer. Balance is the core of how we show up in the world. You can't move confidently in your body or in your business, I believe, without having that core strength that leads to balance. So for me, I'm not giving up on that word yet. I'm doubling down on it.
Yeah. I don't think we talked about that the other day. I didn't know the professionally trained dancer. I mean, I am somewhat, but I did musicals, so I had a lot of dance training, but I
That's a
can't
lot
claim
of
to have been.
choreography. I
It's a
think if you've
lot of
done musicals,
choreo.
you have to say that you're really good at choreography.
Yeah, that's right. But what I resonate with is my whole world in that, and I've had to have people remind me that in this other world that I inhabited before, it was always the work was tied with the physical and my sense of being. To me, it had to do how I was portraying a story, a character, living in someone else's body on stage. I had to be aware of all of the tension and all those things you're talking about. But we do forget to bring that piece along in business. I want to ask you a question. So I want to ask sort of the core question that we ask in this podcast to you, but in a slightly different way. So the thing we're always trying to get to and explore, of course, is if you're a person with a heart for service, you care about the people you serve, making a difference in their lives. As you scale, a question on your mind is going to be, how do I continue to take great care of the people in my charge? How do I continue to be true to my core values and who I am and what we've made this business and this team to be? How do we stay true to what makes us uniquely powerful and effective in at the scale that we've been as we grow? So we're always trying to explore that, but we're already kind of in that conversation, and so I'm curious with you, the spin I'm kind of want to put on it is where you see the intersection of this issue of capacity and identity impacting that ability to continue to serve well, to continue to be true to who you are.
I'll answer this with a quote from Myron Golden from one of my favorite podcasts this year. He talks about this idea of be fruitful and multiply is really about the law of increase. Like we're meant to grow, to circulate more value, and to provide the opportunity for others around us to grow and flourish as well. And what I loved about that idea of this law of increase, like the universe is meant to continue expanding. I'm not a scientist. One of my favorite facts is that scientists can't measure the end of the universe because it seems to be continuously expanding. And so what I would say that's perhaps different than how others would answer the service question, how do we take the best care of people? I would actually answer it by we have to take the best care of our own growth journey. And we have to be so fastidious and conscious and dedicated to our process of self-expansion, which I would say is both identity evolution and expanding the capacity. I don't think capacity is infinite, but we get to choose where to point it. And that is always within our control. We always have a sense of agency about how we want to show up and who we want to be. And the older I get, the more I think like, gosh, we just can't control so much. Like there's so much that we can't control, but we can control ourselves and we can control our response to situations. We can control the reps we put into our business. We cannot control or even predict. I wish I could. I really do. I spend way too much time trying to predict the outcome. We can't control that, but we do get to control, similar to an athlete, how many times we go to the gym, how many times I do my spinal stretching to maintain my core stability and flexibility and balance. That is what we get to control. So I believe that leaders become an instrument. If our body is an instrument for our experience, I believe we tune our instrument by choosing to grow, choosing to expand, choosing to participate in the law of increase. And I believe that when we grow, when we expand, we are of service to the world because we're showing the world we're doing our work. We're not asking people in services. We're not asking people to do things that we wouldn't do for ourselves or our business. And once we're in integrity with that, in very simple terms, for all the experts out here, this is always the hardest thing. And the one thing that I see every single client, revenue explode. When we do the thing that we're most gifted at for clients on ourselves, revenue blows up. Like every time, without question.
How do you do this for yourself? Can you do this for, like, how do you manage your own capacity question, in running this business?
Yeah, I mean, I like to keep it honest. So 13 months ago, I launched this project of what would my business look like if I participated in the law of expansion and increase. And it's taken a few different forms. The first research question was, most of my business has been with deep one-to-one transformation with a client. I show up on Zoom, we coach, and that's the container. And I've evolved it quite a bit in the last 13 months. The first question I asked myself is, if I had to teach someone else to do what I do, how would I do that? And that launched multiple revenue tests, including a training certification for other coaches that eventually became a group program and that eventually became software. So I can answer your question very simple right now. I started doing the coaching exercises that I give to clients for 2 hours a week on myself. I took kind of my greatest hits, like a Taylor Swift Eras tour. It's like, what are all the things that I know have changed the game for clients? And I literally started doing it on myself. The quickest, easiest example, I've had a lot of clients who are marketing agencies and marketing consultants and professionals, and they don't do their own marketing. And I'm like, hey guys, what's your marketing plan? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, what's your marketing plan for you? So it's a super tangible, silly, but true example that often we just don't do what we're best at for other people. I had a finance professional as a client years ago, and I very gently asked, I just kind of had this intuition that something was a little awry in the house of finances for his business. I said, hey, how often do you close your books on time every month and review your financial statements? And he said, I haven't closed my books in months. And I was like, that's why your sales are in a drought. Has nothing to do with your leads, your sales conversations. It's the fact that you're not in integrity with the results you produce for other people. And I said, who's your bookkeeper? He said, I don't have one. And I was like, okay, great. We're going to hit pause on everything we're working on. Clean up your house. And that happens inevitably with every client I've ever worked with. There's something subtle or that large and glaring where we're just not doing the work on ourselves. So at this point, I go back to the drawing board. I actually pull up my software. I run myself through my coaching exercises, which prior to that I did on my Google Docs. So there's always an intro version to anyone's big idea. And I just ran myself through the coaching exercises and stepped into using the tools I've used on my clients, quite literally on my own business. And sometimes that was 2 hours a week. Sometimes, frankly, I needed more time. But there's always a tune-up process. And now I've installed a team who actually can, because I've trained other people in the method, I can actually give them a call and say, like, hey, I need you to run me through this exercise. I'm going to be the client this time. And they actually run me through the exercise and tell me what my blind spots are, according to them. Everyone's perception is different, but I really value that feedback. So I've actually trained others to know what I know at some level, given them the software and the tools and said, hey, please use it on me and help me understand what my blind spots are. But I just know for a fact in the type of business that you and I run, and for everyone listening, if we can turn our magic for a second on ourselves, which is so uncomfortable and maybe feels really foreign, that's been the biggest explosive factor of growth for me, both revenue wise, but also clarity. I would say the clarity that's come from using my own process on myself has been astronomical.
That's incredible. Well, and it would give you anyone who does this, right? It would only increase your confidence that it works. If it
100%.
can work on you, it can work on anyone else. But you did solve the other piece that on the marketing side, people get stuck. We don't do the work ourselves because there's a very real truth that we can't.
Right.
The one thing that we know is that everyone is too close to their own story. So we really can't do our own messaging. Every client we work with, they just can't possibly tell their own story. They're too close to it. And that applies down the road to as you're building out the marketing strategies and all those things and just trying to see what's best going to click and work for your business. So eventually that outside perspective on someone's story and collaboration of those viewpoints is essential to make it all work. That's one question. Before we do our sort of final questionnaire here, to that idea of telling your story, we do like to explore the reason why so much marketing wastes time and money is because no one has worked with that business to stop and think about, okay, how do you tell that story? How do you tell the right story to the right people? And that's brand strategy. That's really all that is. That's everything that is. It's a big deal. Nothing works until that's in place. So I always like to explore with people how, as you've grown and as this business has matured over the last 6.5 years, how is your understanding of how you tell the story of the relationship between what you offer and your clients changed or grown?
The word that comes to mind is simplifying. And I think it's frankly Matt, the hardest thing that I've had to do in my business. Like exactly what you said. We can't read the label when we're in the jar. Like we just can't. None of us can. And I would say more than anything, identity work is kind of this deep, soulful journey that I feel called to do for myself, that I've done in this really tremendously deep way across, frankly, every area of life you could possibly imagine. So I've really lived this experience. I've embodied it. But what was so frustrating for me over the last several years was, gosh, how do I quantify it? Like, no business owner is sitting up at 11 o'clock at night thinking about revenue, thinking about payroll, thinking about their team and growth strategy, and thinking, you know what I need? I need a new identity. Like, it's just never occurred. And so I guess what I would say is I spent the last 13 months kind of on that problem, is not only how do I describe what I do, but what are the other methods? What are the other applications for doing what I do? So there's both a messaging question as well as a business model question. And the biggest unlock for me is realizing I can put a number to capacity. I am a trained executive coach. I've had years of experience coaching as well as consulting. I've done a lot of consulting in operations and HR, which are kind of my two specialties in addition to revenue strategy. So it's kind of that triangle of people, process, product. But what I realized is I also have an MBA. And I forget that. Like that identity didn't really land for me. It wasn't the degree I wanted to go get. It's a long story, but I basically had a free degree handed to me by a university where I was working in my early 20s. And I had a job and I was great at my job. And they said, you have to get a master's degree to keep your job. And I was like, what? Like, I'm already good at my job. Like, look at the numbers. And they're like, it doesn't matter. Like, you have to get a degree. So I got the MBA to satisfy a requirement to keep the job I had that I was successful at. And I don't know. I was meant to be an entrepreneur because I can't deal with that level of bureaucracy. And what was so funny to me though is I realized I'm always future casting identity. I'm always future casting like what comes next, who about us comes next. And what I've recently learned, and this is more of a humble, like in progress learning, is sometimes the past identities have an unlock or a key that we might not be accessing. So I kind of rehired the MBA cast and I was like, well, how would you quantify identity coaching? Like, how would you talk about this? And that's where capacity came in. And I was too close to it to see it. That's always what I've been unlocking in my W-2 journey before having the coaching business, like that's what I was going around unlocking was capacity for teams and individuals. And I was able to put numbers to it because I ran hiring pipelines and I had budget and forecasting tools. And I realized that the answer was not just in future casting the next identity, but actually rehiring one of my past identities that I sort of kind of put in the closet. I was like, who cares? Like an MBA, like whatever. I've talked dozens of people out of getting an MBA. I'm like, it's really not that valuable. Just go read some books. In fact, when I was in my MBA curriculum, I read all of the For Dummies books, like Operations for Dummies, Marketing for Dummies. That was like my shadow curriculum because I was like, this stuff isn't practical that I was learning in school. But to summarize, I realized that it's not always about the future, it's also connecting the dots backwards and realizing that maybe a past part of our identity has the solution to the problem we're currently facing in our business. And how do we simply rehire that person? And that's how I got to quantifying the impact of capacity in an organization and at the individual level and being able to assign an ROI number to that, which really has changed the game for my business. It helped explode me from selling, contracts prior, signing clients anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 a month for an individual, and then being able to instantly sell $30,000 to $50,000 engagements to organizations to drive massive change and impact. So I think for any of us listening, maybe just a question to workshop is maybe what's a past identity that you could rehire to solve the current problem in your business? And there's probably something in our past that we've forgotten about, and we could reuse or remix some of those gifts in order to help us solve the current problem.
A wonderful concept to rehire one one of your past selves. And most of us,
Yeah, it's a boomerang.
you know, this far down the road, we've lived a couple lives, and it reminds me of when on our side of things when we're doing brand messaging for a company, one of the essential things you have to identify to tell a good story in an empathetic way that makes somebody feel heard, like you're telling their story. Step one is articulating the problem that they're up against, the problem that they face. And really, it's two pieces. It's what you said earlier. What do they want? What are their goals? And what is the obstacle in the way? And if you can nail those two things down, you're beginning to build a bridge of empathy to help someone feel heard within their own story. It's just the simple act of saying, hey, I really see you. I really see where you're trying to go. I see what's in the way. That stinks. And I've been there, and we actually know how to help you with that. That's good marketing messaging. But what happens is, out of anxiety to want to be approved of, to want to prove that we're good at what we do, we tend to shove solutions into those buckets. So we try and prescribe what we know to be an answer, what we know they need to be thinking about into those early parts of our marketing messaging, but we have to meet them where they're at. So a great example is, your problem is your identity's all askew. You've lost your sense of identity. And like you
Right.
said, most people aren't living in that space, but your problem is you have a real sense that your team is not working to capacity, and that something's missing, and that people aren't maybe right in the right roles and the right seats. And if you could just dial that in, oh my God, what could your team accomplish? Well, a lot of people are, if they're in the leadership role, are sitting in that level of awareness. They know that there's something not right in how they dialed in their team. You can meet them there. And then in story brand terms, we say in the thing that I'm trained in, we say you make the person you're talking to the hero of the story, make them the protagonist of their own narrative, talk about what they want, what problem they're solving. Then you arrive as a guide to be able to help them with a particular set of skills that happen to arrive in the right moment. But in that, when they meet the guide and they meet you, then that's the opportunity to be able to enlighten, to bring new ideas to the table, because that's exactly the moment where they're ready to hear that. If it happens
Yeah.
too soon, they're like, what are you talking about? I don't know that. I'm not worried about that. I don't care about that. Tell me a different story. But I really resonate too with the rehiring the past self. Like, I went from theater guy to marketing, and for so long I felt like the theater kid who snuck into the marketing class. And that was a big, and it sounds so crazy to say, because when I talk about it now and people understand it so well, I'm like, I've spent my whole life figuring out how to tell stories in powerful ways. I did it over
Yep.
here for 25 years, and I brought it into this world. And I see the juncture of those two things. But early on, I was like, oh, no, maybe that people know that about me. They're going to think he doesn't know what he's doing, right? Instead of honoring those past selves and celebrating how if anyone's paying attention right now, we know that we've rehired ourselves, most of us in any career, like 5 times already. and that and that none of that experience most of the time is wasted. So why can't we have those? What I love about what I guess this is my long way of getting back to what I love about what you're doing is you're inviting people into very real, very vulnerable conversations. And to me, those are some of the most productive moments people can have. Well, I just think you are doing this is not a good enough adjective for it, but incredible, very needed work out there. And just I think coaches and consultants at their best really do help people answer their own questions and find a liberation to live into their own identity. But this is to me is one of the best models I've ever heard of this being done. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and I hope,
Matt, thank you.
yeah. Oh, you're very welcome. Well, I wish we had many more hours to talk about this, but we're going to wrap up with what we call our behind the brand questionnaire. And this is so, again, people need to know the human behind the work and the task and the goals and all the things that they're going to work with in a B2B space when they're going to trust you to take them on this really personal but powerful journey that you've been on. They're going to trust us to get a hold of their marketing strategy and their identity from that end. They're going to have to meet the person behind the brand. So these are seven questions. All right, that's
Here
will
we
help people
go.
get to know you. Here we go. Number one, what is your go-to karaoke song? Or if you don't like karaoke, what song do you wish you could sing and then you would go do it?
I love karaoke. So that the song that I've been doing for years is I Will Survive. Like very old school disco vibes. Gloria Gaynor all the way.
Nice. Nice. That's excellent. That's a fun one too, because people will sing with you. That's a sing-along
Totally.
karaoke song. What is the last thing that made you laugh out loud?
All right, this is a little embarrassing. I don't watch reality TV. I would like to caveat that. There's only one exception, and it's Below Deck Mediterranean. I love the
Okay.
Below Deck franchise. I've seen not all of them. I don't want to paint that picture. But the debrief, when I've gotten my fiance involved with watching it with me, and now we can laugh about the characters together, that's like the next level of just silly. And it means nothing. It's not serious. It's not deep, but we just laugh. And it's so fun to unpack it. He's a clinical psychologist. So I always try to get the psychological read on the crazy. So yeah, armchair quarterbacking next to a clinical psychologist analyzing reality TV stars is a pretty good laugh.
Maybe that's why I don't like those shows. My wife loves all of those things, and I get so frustrated, and I think it's because I can't figure out why they act the way they do.
No, I don't know if
Why
anyone
would a
can,
human?
but
It's
there's
because there's a
theories.
camera on them. Yeah.
Exactly.
What is your favorite way to get away from it all?
I love to travel. There is nothing as special to me as seeing a new place, but I would caveat that and say also seeing a familiar place anew. So I've spent probably 6 weeks plus in Portugal at this point, over 10 years. I kind of consider it at this point a second home. I have a Portuguese family. Some of them are coming over for my wedding later this year. And I love going back to the same place different and traveling to somewhere familiar, yet each time I go back, I'm changed. And I feel really lucky to go back there specifically because I have such good friends who've officially adopted me, and I'm the first American that's ever visited the village that their ancestors are from. So I've gotten some really interesting behind the scenes tours of Portugal, which is just so near and dear to my heart.
It's incredible. When you said family, you mean like found family? Is that
Found family, yeah. I mean, they will tell you I'm their family, but found family. I look nothing like them. But they've adopted me fully.
okay? But let's just note that you found a found family in 6 weeks of time invested in Portugal. That's pretty impressive. What oh, I love this. What smell reminds you of a specific place or time?
These are surprisingly hard. I would say that the smell of wet asphalt, wet pavement. I live in Southern California, and most of my life there's been droughts. But whenever that smell comes up, it just reminds me of childhood And one of my favorite things to do with big rainstorms, California, with the droughts, has also had massive weather patterns and flooding. And so when I was little, there was an El Nino storm. I don't remember what year, I don't remember how old I was, but we built these like tiny little boats, and then we just like sent them down the gutter or the flooded street where I grew up on. And so the smell of wet pavement just reminds me of the infrequent California rainstorms as a little kid.
Wow, that's awesome. What is one day in your life you would like to relive?
None. I don't think I would go back and relive anything. I cherish. If there was one, I would have to say maybe the day that I got engaged last summer. So about 13 months ago, my fiance proposed in Chicago. And I'm from California, third generation. And when I was a little girl, I'd never visited Chicago. Now I'm marrying someone from Chicago. And when I was a little girl, I always wished I was from Chicago. And I'd practice my Chicago accent. And I'd say, hey, I'm Kiesi, I'm from Chicago. Like, nice to meet you. So it's just kind of this funny nod to maybe our childhood dreams do come true years and years and years later. But gosh, like Matt, I think every day is precious. And I don't think I would relive or change any of it at this point.
That's wonderful. That's the first time anyone's answered that way. What 3 words would your loved ones use to describe you?
Quirky, intelligent, and kind. I think.
Oh, wonderful.
I don't know. I hope so. I'm going to go ask them after this call. I hope that's what they would say. I think quirky's got to be on there, though. That's got to be on there.
I bet a lot of people say that. They're like, I got to go ask my husband, my fiance, my family. Okay. What would it mean to have truly succeeded in your work? Not just as sort of along the lines we've talked about, not like the company, but Cassandra.
It's another pattern interrupt, but I'm just going to tell you top of mind. I also like to speak top of heart, like what hit my heart first. I would say that I changed. My deepest joy is walking alongside leaders in transition and teams undergoing change. It feels like a privilege and an honor. But I would say the greatest success is that I'm changed. Because like I said in the podcast, like I believe that we can't lead people where we're not willing to go. And so I think the greatest success is that over time, I continue to change. I continue to evolve.
Yeah, that's a marker of the work that you hold yourself accountable to, but also that's a good point. It's an indicator to any of us, it's an indicator that we dug in, right? If we dig in with people, we're going to be changed by them, in a relationship. Wow, that was awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that, first of all. Second of all, where can people connect with you? Where should they look you up? What's the first thing they should do if they would love to talk to you about your services?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. This has been such a joy. I hang out on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn and gscg.ai. Feel free to send a note, especially if you're looking to work together. There's an easy way to book a call on there. And if you have any questions, hello@gscg.ai. I personally read those and would love to hear if you're undergoing change or transition and interested in expanding capacity for you or your team. I'm very happy to say hello. But come hang out on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, I hope everyone does. I think they'll be the better for it. And from this side of things, we have a brand new program called Scale Beyond Referrals that is for B2B service providers. It's for B2B service providers who probably gave up on marketing at some point and are trying to get by on referrals and warm introductions. And we help restore your faith in marketing and help understand why it didn't work in the past and introduce you to, rather than a transactional model of marketing, a relational one that is built for a space that is built on relationships and trust. So we have a workshop that we teach that introduces you to all that. That's at scalebeyondreferrals.com. And you can also find us at brand3.net. I was your host, Matt Wolf, and this has been the CEO's Heart for Service. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining our conversation on how to scale a business without losing its heart. If you found this episode helpful, here are 3 quick ways you can support our podcast and share it with others. First, subscribe to the show here on this platform. Second, leave a review in your podcast app. Your feedback helps other leaders with a heart for service to find this community. And third, share this episode with a B2B leader who's trying to scale their business without compromising the quality of their services. The CEO's Heart for Service is a production of Brand 3. If you're a B2B service provider who delivers exceptional service, but struggles to get your marketing to connect with the right people, find us at brand3.net. And sign up for our Brand 3 newsletter that only sends marketing insights worthy of your inbox. Genuinely helpful stuff for the road ahead. The CEO's Heart for Service is also supported by Forge Podcast Company, a turnkey production solution for using podcasts to reach a wider audience, win new clients, and grow. Find them at forgepodcast.co.